Welcome, everybody. Episode 2, Future of Beauty Unfiltered. I am so excited. We have not one but 2 guests joining us today. One is actually our very own Chris Bullock, CEO here at the Pull Agency. Amazing brand brain, ex-P&Ger, and just all-round great guy. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you. Do I get a pay rise for that?
Well, we'll talk about it.
Okay, all right. And actually, this second guest we are beyond thrilled to have today. A well-renowned marketing copywriter, creative director, and author, Steve Harrison. Steve has been the world's leading direct marketing creative director. He has been the European creative director at OgilvyOne and worldwide creative director at Wunderman. He also founded his own agency, HTW, which quickly became the benchmark for creative excellence, not only here in the UK, but around the world. He has won more major awards in his discipline than any other in the world. Steve has written several books, including How to Do Better Creative Work and Can't Sell, Won't Sell, Advertising, Politics and Culture Wars. The latter has been described by the IPAs as the most provocative advertising book in years. Don't we know it? We talk about it a lot internally here at Pull. The book explores the advertising and marketing industry's obsession with brands' pursuit of social purpose and other political agendas in their advertising. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us today. We've been so excited to talk to you. Obviously, you were going to be a panellist for us at Future of Beauty. Yes. One of our recent pieces of research is your brand Too Woke, brand versus social purpose. And I'm really excited to actually have you here today because, you know, a lot of actually the reason why we came up with the topic and I guess the pursuit for this research and insight from consumers was the back of a lot of your books and I think your thinking, and I think it's a really, really fascinating topic indeed. You know, we've got loads of questions today, but I think what I'd love to do is just recap why, I guess, Future of Beauty Unfiltered exists a little bit. And I think one of the things that we've learned since launching our series of research in 2020, which is nationwide pieces of research with over 2,000 respondents across the UK, the focus has always been to understand, I guess, what the consumer thinks. And I think that's really important sometimes in the marketing spaces. We forget that. So to make sure you're sharpening the pencil and checking back in on, you know, where people's heads are at is really important. And this topic was very close to our hearts, I think, in a lot of ways. It sparked a lot of debate internally, didn't it? And I think what was really interesting for me when we kind of set out on this was, and feel free to chip in, Chris, if there's anything in particular that you feel I missed, but I think it was the disconnect we felt we saw once we'd done the research. So, you know, it was a very controversial topic. It was based around advertising, you know, inclusivity, diversity, lots and lots of conversations in that area. And do people feel represented in this space? Are advertisers getting it right? And you know, it was really important to us that the questions we put together and even the answers available were non-biased. And that actually meant having some not so great answers along with some that from a personal perspective we might agree with. And I think the thing that really shocked us was we naturally tested it against our peers before we put it out to consumer. And the response we got was, you can't send that, you can't say that, this is going to offend people, this use of language, this term is biased, you're trying to sway. And that obviously wasn't the intent in which we'd written it, but I think eventually after taking all of that very valuable and, you know, appreciated feedback on board, we took a deep breath and went, we believe in this research, we believe the answers we are trying to get are non-biased, so we're going to kind of take a deep breath, hit the button and cross our fingers and wish for the best. And I think the thing that really surprised us was the difference between the reaction from the consumer to the reaction we had from the marketeer. And it definitely led to a lot of questions for us, which was, are we the problem? So I guess when we designed this survey and event, that backlash that we got from the marketeers, you know, it did stand out against what the consumers said. Do you think that the consumer cares less about pursuing social purpose in advertising potentially than the marketing and advertising community do?
Let me first address the the alarming, your alarming observation that the people in the marketing community just didn't want you to do the research in the first place. That, for me, is probably the most striking point now. Why would an industry that doesn't decide what to have on the lunch menu without doing research into that? Which pub should we go to after work? Let's do some qual and some quant. And then they didn't want you to do research into one of the most pressing issues affecting our industry at the moment. And I think it's because they didn't want the results that you were probably going to show. I mean, it reminds me, your findings have reminded me very much of what Andrew Tenzer and Ian Murray have found with their, and if your listeners have not read their research, I think it alongside the research that you've done is the most interesting that's been done for the past 4 or 5 years. Andrew Tenzer and Ian Murray's The Aspiration Window, The Empathy Delusion and Gut Instinct. And their conclusion was, we find the same basic pattern being reinforced time and time again. Advertisers and marketers diverge from the mainstream on every major psychological, behavioral, and attitudinal framework that we have explored. They inhabit two different worlds. And this is the conclusion that Andrew and Ian have reached about the closed world that the marketing community live in.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, your other question was, what was the...
It was around really more, consumers potentially not caring as much about the pursuit for social cause. And we didn't identify that they didn't care.
Yeah.
Chris?
Well, what we did identify, which surprised me slightly, was that 32% actually wanted brands to support what we'd defined as, list of woke causes. But as was picked up elsewhere, Lionel Schreiber, for instance, a Spectator article, a bit skeptical about whether they cared that much. And actually, Andrew Tenzer refers to this idea of consumers as cognitive misers, which I think is important because I think it's just the point is not so much that they have a strong view either way. They don't really have a view either way. When they're asked, though, they'll feel inclined to give what they think is probably the answer that's expected. So I think in reality, people are even less interested than our research showed.
This is something Andrew cites as social desirability bias, that you will give the answer that you feel makes society think you're a good person.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting, actually. I think over the years, I've done a lot of kind of work on, I guess just personality analysis and things in a sales environment from the role that I do. And I think what's really interesting is, like you say, you give the answer based on what you think they want to hear rather than actually the rightful answer. And I think that was one of the challenges when we were writing the answers to the questions, was you had to have some extreme views that even might be different to your own that you felt uncomfortable with reading, because it gives you a gauge on where those comfort levels were.
Sure.
And I think that was, really interesting. I think, do you think there's a turning point in social purpose now? Have we peaked? I think Andrew, in our event, like I mentioned earlier, rightly pointed out when I actually asked him this question, Andrew Tenzer, he said, we live in a little bit of a warped world where some people are struggling to just turn their lights on at the moment with kind of the electricity crisis and situations that we're in, the cost of living, there's a lot of stuff that's going on in the wider world, and yet there seems to still be this huge drive and push around social purpose. Have we peaked at that point?
I think Andrew said that here we are on a Thursday morning talking about social purpose, when everybody else is actually talking about how they're going to pay their fuel bill, how they, kind of why their big shop has gone from £10 every visit to £12 every visit. That kind of, is the tide turning? I think that the most instructive moment for me was 2 weeks ago when Mark Pritchard, who is probably the most famous advocate for social purpose in the marketing community, and another P&G man, Chris, And
Have we gone too far?
Well, he said...
It is a big question, isn't it?
Well, he said week last Friday, I think it was, that profit comes before purpose. I mean, we know that pre-COVID, people were asking questions like, is there any point to profit without purpose? Post-COVID, you get Mark saying that it's profit before purpose and, quote, the order matters, because first and foremost, we're in business. Our job is to innovate on our products. Our growth drives economic good. Growth drives jobs. It decides the partners you work with, the retailers you work with, and it enables you to do more good for society and planet. Force for growth leads to being a force for good. And I think that the implicit message of that is that telling people you're making the world a better place does not sell as well in telling people that you make a better profit. So I'd repeat that telling people that you're making the world a better place does not sell as well and does not contribute to growth as well as telling people that you make them a better product.
It doesn't necessarily make the world a better place either. So
no, but it funds your
sure.
laudable intentions. And that if you're not selling that product and turning a healthy profit, then all your laudable intentions, and let's not denigrate those laudable intentions, but you will not be able to achieve those things. You will not be able to hit your targets. You will break your promises that you have got to, as Mark Pritchard says, we're not paying enough attention to growth.
Well, I think absolutely. And what he meant was if it's all you do, and I mean, there are marketers who have been proponents of it being the only thing you do that matters.
Yeah.
And I think that what he's doing is helping the industry row back a little bit from that position. I mean, you and I talked about this, Steve, and questioned whether there is some kind of turning point. It feels as though there is to me. Both you and I have had people, come to us and say, I'd like to be seen to appreciate what you're saying or you're writing, but I can't be seen to do that. I think you and I are both writing things in the public domain now that we would have found very difficult to have done a couple of years ago.
Well, I don't think we've turned a debate into to our side, but at least a debate is being had, which 2 years ago it wasn't.
Yeah.
There was a groupthink, there was a conventional wisdom, which was not to be challenged. And I think it is being challenged and it's being questioned and the debate is being had. And that's a wonderful thing. But I am still getting emails from people saying that I would love to be able to comment on your posts, but I will suffer, quote, reputational damage if I do so.
Yep.
And that for an industry, for a creative industry that is founded on freedom of thought and expression, is a damning indictment of the situation that's been allowed to develop by the industry's institutions, and I include those, the Advertising Association, the DNAD, the DMA, the networks, the holding companies that allowed this kind of groupthink to be imposed and this fear to exist. I think it's a shocking indictment.
Yep, agreed.
And I think what's challenging as well, and it's one of the things we've observed, is sometimes the lack of diversity in thinking in this particular topic comes down to the lack of diversity of conversation. And I think we talk about this a lot internally, don't we, Chris? Challenging those mindsets and not being afraid to challenge and say no.
And encouraging completely different views to be aired. For me, doing that piece of research, which we were told by the industry was controversial, and we were told by the consumer was fantastic, and we're so glad you asked. It created a debate in the agency, which I couldn't quite believe, and it's been really cathartic. I mean, everybody has had their say. Yeah. I wrote my, about my point of view, and some of our youngest team members were immediately asked to counter that. They did exactly that. And instead of this thing sort of festering in the closed circles, which is normal, we have a Venn diagram now where, the woke and the unwoke of the agency kind of moved towards each other, debated these subjects. And I think what we found is that they actually had much more common ground than each party, as it were, thought. That in a real world view, there wasn't this terrible divergence that you see exacerbated by social media.
I think that the vast majority of people who work in the industry are tired of the politicisation of the workplace. They simply want to get down to doing work that they could be proud of. And I think that the drive towards social, the insistence that social purpose is the raison d'etre for the industry is one that has been driven by a relatively very small coterie of activists who are genuinely committed to the cause of rectifying climate change, to the cause of rectifying institutional racism. Sincerely committed to that, but also they're joined by a group of opportunistic award seekers and careerists who see that this is the way of furthering their career.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I think one of the things as well that I found quite interesting was, and to no surprise actually when we had the discussion at the panel, the generational and gender differences within it. And I think Andrew, again, he's getting a lot of airtime here because he gave us some great kind of references. When I asked him about the elusive Gen Z that everyone seems to have caught up on a little bit, it was rather than thinking about them as a group of people, think about them as the group of people in that stage of their life. And he referenced, look back at the 60s, the people now that potentially are being a little bit more cynical, kind of the skeptics you'd look to now. They back then were the ones pushing the boundaries, challenging and driving. And I think a lot of the time, actually, we forget that. I mean, we have this conversation all the time, don't we?
I mean, I think it's another one of those frauds about Generation Z, to be honest. I mean, we often say everything's changed, nothing's changed. And to my mind, I mean, young people have always been idealistic, revolutionary, reactionary, and have had different worldviews and attitudes to their parents. And that hasn't really changed. So this idea that, Generation Z is some newly minted form of human being with a superior moral framework, much more likely to incline to support social causes, etc., is to me, it's something of an illusion. It's a transitory phase, and it's only what you'd expect. And I mean, and again, Andrew, like you say, you get a lot of said don't muddle up cohort effect with a generational one, and therefore looking at the whole of Generation Z, and the only thing they have in common is their age, and saying, well, look at this. Mankind has changed. It's just nonsense.
I think it's a massive generalisation based upon the attitudes of, again, it's probably a small group of people who appear to be driving the attitudes and behaviours of their generation. Youngsters have always sought to differentiate themselves from their parents. Traditionally, it has been through fashion, through music, through the way they dance, through the way you get out of your head.
Oh yeah, don't tell me I look like my mum. Biggest insult ever, but she's great.
But the problem is now that the dividing line between adult and youngster is blurred completely.
Yeah.
Look at the average age of people who go to Glastonbury, for goodness sake.
I think technology's played a huge part in that as well.
Yes, it has. But now I think that if you can't differentiate by clothing, by fashion, because your mum and dad are clinging on, kind of tenaciously to their youth, then the way that this generation does differentiate itself is from its set of social values and berating mum and dad about the words, the language that they use, berating mum and dad, scolding them about the produce that they buy. But I do believe that is probably only, frankly, a small group of people within that cohort. I mean, when I was a punk, there were only 5 punks in Blackpool until 1977. Oh, believe me. Kind of the core, the people who lead youth movements are a tiny minority. And when those youth movements become mass, they actually dissipate into meaninglessness. So I think that the people who are leading the youth movement for social justice are a tiny minority of where the young people are at. Bobby Duffy has written a brilliant book. He was the director of global research at Ipsos, and he's written a brilliant book called Generations, and he says that one of the biggest myths the media press upon us is this idea that we're building a generation of social revolutionaries, social activists. The difference between Generation Zers and millennials are actually very tiny, and actually the people who are doing something about the climate crisis, the ones who are more willing to get actively involved, are the millennials. So when it comes to actually doing something, the millennials are much more willing to become involved and make sacrifices.
And this is the researchers' great challenge, isn't it?
Not the millennials, sorry, the boomers. Sorry,
No, you're absolutely right.
Not the millennials, certainly not the millennials, the boomers.
Well, this
you know,
is how
the
our
difference
research was
between
born as well.
exactly what people say they do and what they actually do is the researchers' ever challenging question. And I think it's getting harder because I think there's a gap, growing gap between what people say they do and what they do. But in sustainability, again, you know, the older generations get a bad rap. And what we found in our research, and again, it's only based on what people said they do, is that young people said they were much more likely to buy sustainable brands than older people. But when it came down to what you actually do about sustainability, okay, you know, recycling, composting, actually doing stuff, it was the boomers that were doing stuff. Yeah. So the youngsters told a good story, but it was the boomers who are actually doing the stuff that take care of the planet.
As the cost of living crisis deepens, it is the boomers who'll be able to afford to do so.
Yeah.
That's a factor as well.
Cantor's research suggested that after the 2008-2009 financial crisis, it took 10 years for people's purchasing habits to return to pre-financial crisis levels vis-a-vis the purchase of organic food, sustainable food.
I remember seeing that.
We are this is a game changer as far as people's active involvement in making...
Unfortunately, unsurprisingly, people's interest in sustainability is directly geared to their disposable income. So it will go down. And we're about to see that.
Unfortunately. Yeah.
I think as well, people are drilling more, we mentioned kind of the difference, or very little difference between Gen Z and Millennial, but actually this is what started off this whole debate for us internally in the first place. So we, as Chris so fondly relives, a dinner between myself, Chris, and an ex-colleague of ours, and you know, we were debating the topic routes, conversations, and I guess fundamentally the key things we wanted to understand from research. And I think the thing that, to Chris's delight, erupted was you had two very strong women at the table who were both technically millennials, but we sat at opposite ends of the age bank within that, and our views, and also even when we referenced even things like who influenced us when we were younger, they were completely...
The hot topic was body positivity, wasn't it?
Oh, gosh.
And you two, blew my brains out by having completely opposite perspectives.
But we were literally, in every other way you could think, we're from the same kind of walk of life, both have the same kind of amazing privilege and opportunities. But when it came to body positivity, you had, you know, one party who was very much like, well, my view was around body positivity that we should be inclusive. So adverts like Marks and Spencer's, you know, 18 months ago, I'd be walking through the underwear section and I'd see a lovely pert bottom with stretch marks on it. And I was like, yes. And it made me stop in my tracks and take a photo and send it to my sisters, being the eldest of 6 kids, 5 girls. I'm always trying to, you know, enforce that body positivity. And I was like, yes, this is amazing. Go. Yeah, show off your tiger stripes. And then you had kind of Claire, who absolutely amazing brand brain, and I loved having the debate with her, kind of was like, I feel very differently. That's not something that would make me go, yes, I want to see aspirational. And it kind of started the debate for us internally of, can beauty be both? And the word both is really key here, aspirational and inclusive. And that was really one of the key topics that led us to go, we need to understand this more, because it seems to be that at times they're kind of picking a side. And we wanted to understand more how that was being translated. So I guess this transitions me really nicely onto my next question, actually.
Can I make a comment about that? As far as body positivity is concerned, if you make obesity acceptable and the norm, that it's okay, that obesity becomes, there's a taboo against obesity because it's actually good for people to have this taboo about obesity, because if you don't say that, if you say that actually obesity is fine and it's something that, kind of you don't need to try and, you need to embrace your obesity, then you have severe danger of subjecting yourself to type 2 diabetes by the time you're 35 years of age.
I think it's a balance for sure.
And you have much greater incidence of heart disease amongst the obese in society. There are a lot of reasons why normalizing obesity is not a great idea. And these kind of taboos are in place not because of the patriarchy imposing these taboos upon people, but because it's actually better for you to remain reasonably slim and slender if you want to live a productive, healthy and happy life. And the advertising community, I think, in extending its remit into these areas is perhaps, in normalizing obesity, having a damaging effect upon society and a means of in an exploitative way.
But do you think so? I think this is really interesting. So I've just had a look at Chris here because he knows this is a real kind of topic for me, and we've debated this a lot. Do you think, though, I completely agree that, we all have a right to strive for a healthy, happy life. But I think bodies come in all shapes and sizes at different fitness levels, health levels, and everything else. And I think while there's normalizing obesity, I think it's more actually identifying that not one body always looks the same way. And what it's actually doing is saying perfection isn't the only option. And I think that's sometimes where it goes too far.
There's a difference between a size 16 and a size 24, though.
Oh, yes.
And I think that 16 could... kind of is perfection, kind of, but a size 24 is dangerously, morbidly overweight.
It reminds me a little bit of some of the feedback we got in the research about diversity and advertisers overdoing it. And the feedback came back really was, look, just reflect society, hold a mirror up to the actuality of UK society in terms of diversity. And while that was more about ethnicity, I'd say principally in terms of the research, I think, so we didn't specifically include, BMI or whatever, but I think that that's what most people want. And that's why for me and for a lot of people, body positivity was the one sort of social woke cause that we put on our list, which was borderline, and people generally came back and supported. And therefore we, after giving Unilever, for instance, a hard time on some of their brands, and Ellen Jope in particular, we single out Dove as doing a game-changing thing when all they did, as you'd see it now, but it was radical at the time, was to use normal-sized people in advertising, which had never been done before. I think where certainly I would agree with Steve, and I think it can go too far, is literally encouraging people to be dramatically obese. And I've seen not so much some ads, but editorial along those lines. I think that's just silly. I would agree with you. But I think what we're seeing in body positivity is just a better reflection of life that you see around you every day.
But I think this comes back to the key debate we're having right now, which is, has it gone too far at points?
Points, probably, yeah.
So I guess just transitioning.
Incidentally, it was the great M.T. Rainey who pioneered, to my mind, body positivity when, for her Marks and Spencer's commercial in about 2006, she showed a lady who would be, by common consensus at that time, overweight, stripping off her clothes, climbing to the top of a hill and shouting.
That's right.
Yeah,
TV
and dear old MT pioneered that, but it was an idea, unfortunately, before its time, before it reflected the fact that the vast majority of people are overweight.
Well, hopefully, if we manage to get this research later on in the year off to the right start, we'll be able to answer some of those questions. So I guess one of the other questions that we wanted to kind of, get your views on, Steve, actually today, was, and it might sound like a really simple one, is what makes good marketing? So I think you've mentioned quite a few times when we've been chatting before we started recording around copywriting. Okay, with your experience in copywriting and kind of brand communications, what do you believe is the most important aspect that brand marketeers need to get right in their messaging to engage with their audience and their consumers?
Customer utility. That should be the focus of all of our marketing activity. How useful is this to the customer? How can we make our products useful to the customer? I think that it's instructive that Mark Pritchard said, okay, our job is to innovate on our products. Okay, our job is to innovate on our products, and then I think the implicit message being then explain to people why that innovation is going to be useful to them, how it will make their lives better, happier, more, whatever. And our focus needs to be to go back to customer utility. I think that the customer utility was the dominant form of marketing and advertising between 1960. There is a fabulous
I love how old school you are with all of your amazing pieces of paper, actually. I'm sat here with my laptop, my battery's slowly running out.
There's a great book written by a man called Jack Springman, it's about to come out soon, I hope, and he explains that between 1960 and 1990 it was the dominance of customer utility at the core of all advertising, and then the obsession with brands began from 1990 through to the present, to the current. And if I may continue, Dave Trott, Mark Ritson, Bob Hoffman will tell you that you build a brand from the bottom up, that you don't get people to buy your product by loving your brand. You get people to love your brand once they bought your product and used it and found it useful in your life.
And this is why I was so dismayed to see the rise of a so-called brand purpose, because it had nothing to do with that, the actual utility of the brand. I mean, the P&G mantra, in a way, is incredibly simple. It's make demonstrably superior products in every category you operate. You must be the brand leader or number two. Otherwise, don't be there. And then communicate that benefit to the consumers. And I can remember when I first discovered that in the interview I had with P&G, I thought, well, this is awesome. How could they possibly go wrong? And of course, the stock performance in particular is demonstrating you can't really. So to me, forgetting the purpose of the brand, which is to provide utility to the consumer, and say that it's actually about the drive for social justice. Yeah. By the way, the consumer won't understand what you're talking about probably. Is just a betrayal of our profession.
I think as well, one of the things Catherine highlighted, our head of brand strategy here at Pull at the event, was one of her observations was every company can have that social purpose, but it doesn't have to be part of your marketing strategy. And I think that's definitely where we've lost our way a little bit, where, I mean, definitely, we've had the pleasure of speaking with over kind of 200 brands, as I mentioned, in the last 18 months. It's been, an amazing opportunity for us to understand themes, recurring challenges, frustrations of all shapes and sizes. And I definitely think one of the key things we've learned is your social purpose doesn't have to be that thing that you share online. It could just be what you do because you want to make the world a better place, or you want to contribute in one way or another and feel like you're making a difference.
Well, you want to be a responsible business, aware of its responsibility to your customers, your suppliers, your employees, your shareholders, and the silent stakeholder, which is the environment. And of course you should be doing all those things. But that doesn't translate, as you say, into marketing strategy. If I may pursue that, in order to have an impact upon people, in the classic role of customer utility, the process is very difficult. You do your research in the marketplace. You find out how your product could be useful to people. You write a brief. You come up with a proposition which isolates and identifies how that product will help people in their lives. You sell that brief to the client. The client buys it. You then sell it to the creatives, who have then got to come up with a proposition which builds emotion into that. Yep. It's then got to be sold to the client who is conservative and risk averse, and this takes ages, and harder. If you do sell it, you've got to protect that idea right through until it appears on screen small screen or big screen, whatever. It's hard work. In order to build that emotional attachment, it's much easier to talk about the oceans the coral reef that is being destroyed, to talk about postnatal depression, to build about, so the shortcut through all of that hard work is actually to build that emotional attachment. I'll attach my brand to this issue and I'll appeal to them, I'll make it emotive that way. But it has jack shit to do.
It's bogus.
With the product or service or the brand, yes, and people aren't stupid.
Well, this is, and again, why principally did the research, and we didn't touch on that, but I mean, the story was, having seen the financial press basically, launch into marketing, and marketing responded by going, but it's the right thing. We're not going to say why. We just, we know we're doing the
Just
right
cause.
thing. Yeah. For me, I thought, well, where is the consumer in all this? I mean, ultimately, I think what we discovered is that social purpose, brand purpose, whatever you want to call it, is all about the marketers themselves, And my advice to modern marketers would be, leave the politics at home. It's not your brand, it's theirs, okay? And the idea that you can spend your brand's marketing budget to promote a cause that is of particular interest to you is unprofessional.
It's a form of fraud, essentially.
Yeah.
Ian Pritchard, who's a great planner, works out of Melbourne in Australia, says that while Bob Hoffman has hit upon the digital fraud of fake, sites, fake, Ian says that actually using the brand's budget, your client's budget, in order to promote the causes that are meaningful to you, is a form of fraud.
Exactly, it's an appropriation of somebody else's resources.
Yes. And it will be very damaging if that budget does not deliver, and you have to.
Well, this is why I think the whole subject is on borrowed time, because at some point, the chickens are going to come home to roost.
Yeah.
So I've got another question for you here, and this is actually for both of you, but Steve, I'd love to get your view first. We saw in the survey, and I think we touched on this earlier, that there's a lot of cynicism with regards to the fact that social purpose, I'll start that again. In the survey, we saw that cynicism with regards to social purpose grows with age. So we touched on it earlier, and is particularly pronounced amongst men. So grumpy old middle-aged white men, as we like to say. So for 25% of Gen Z, promoting social causes is of the highest importance compared to 9% of the 55-plus generation. I think the thing that I'm really intrigued about isn't necessarily that statistic, because we spoke earlier around the age piece. However, one of the extra things that came out when we dug a bit deeper was men in this particular category. They definitely...
Health and beauty, you mean?
Yeah, health and beauty. Men in health and beauty, they felt very differently about...
Underrepresented.
Well, one, they kind of were a bit more cynical about the social causes that were coming out with 9%.
Yep.
But actually, on the back of that information, we also then found that 64% of men don't feel well represented in health and beauty advertising. And some commented that body positivity doesn't seem to have extended to men at all. My favourite line was, I can understand why. I don't think I'd buy a product from a fat, bald man either. And there was kind of a bit of jest around it. And they made a lot of effort, actually, to feed into this commentary about the fact that they feel like men in the beauty category they aren't particularly represented in a diverse way. Do you think the industry's guilty of double standards a little bit in that sense?
I think society is guilty of double standards. You've just, within 2 minutes, talked about grumpy old middle-aged men. You just talked about...
Because I work with them, that's why.
Fat old bald men. And you wouldn't dream of referring to women in those terms. So why do you think that it's okay to talk about men in those terms, but you would never dream of referring to a middle-aged woman in those terms. Can I ask you that?
Well, they referred to themselves as the fat old bald man, not us.
Right. Okay. But you talked about
I'll relay it.
You
Yeah.
quoted with some relish.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it was more. He took great joy in sharing that
There you go.
information. Yeah, definitely. I think there are double standards, and that, funnily enough, is again another conversation that we had, in the sense that in this pursuit for beauty with women, I think I touched on it with you earlier. There are some people that will go out of their way to have aesthetic treatments and then potentially hide it from their other halves, or not be open about any additional work or whatever it is that they have done in this pursuit of youth or beauty in their eyes.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of double standards in a lot of different ways, because, you know I've had this conversation where I sit there and go, no, it's about body positivity, and it's about, showing all the wobbles and all the shapes and sizes. And then I go and contradict myself, because I get my hair done and I spend lots of money on facial products and go and, all these different things. And I try and watch what I eat and exercise, partially for health reasons, but partially for vanity reasons.
Yeah.
And I think when we've had these debates internally, Chris, you and I, the response has been, when you've kind of challenged me, and I've just sat there and gone, oh, now I don't know. I think it's because I've been programmed to say that response. I'm doing it for me. And I think, there is a lot of double standards going on in a lot of different ways. But I think the thing that we found really interesting in this research is that men don't really feel represented within the category on quite a large basis.
Yeah, I am not remotely surprised. I think that you'll probably find that white working class men would probably give you an even more emphatic response. As
Well,
to
they
why
did. I mean, the older, the whiter, and the more male our audience was, the more they, for instance, felt unrepresented.
But also C2D people from that cohort.
Which we didn't.
The only time you ever see a white working class male in advertising nowadays is when Harry Redknapp is telling you to go and spunk your meagre wages at kind of Betfair or Betfred or whatever, or Ray Winston is, kind of the underrepresentation of white working class people in general is phenomenal. It's that, and the underrepresentation of people from the Indian subcontinent is also quite remarkable.
Yep. I mean, with regard to the health and beauty industry specifically, in Hannah's question, I think that the industry hasn't really caught up how to deal with men. And what I mean by that is that what was very interesting to me was that men, elder men in particular, said they felt underrepresented, but they didn't care. Now the question is, would they really do care? And I think there's a complexity there, which so where the industry has maybe caught up with the way women feel about how they look, I think it hasn't with men. I mean, we're just completing some research for a client, and without sort of giving too much away, it's looking at male and female attitudes towards aesthetic procedures. And actually what we found is there's barely any difference, male versus female.
Really?
Yeah.
It's interesting, because I think, so I was talking to Joseph Harwood last week, and their wonderful kind of trans non-conformist person within the health and beauty community, particularly within the makeup space. And they referenced something that a perfume note had said to them. They were being very hush-hush because they couldn't tell us who they were working with. But that in the 50s, perfume was unisex, and that actually it was marketing that created the gender divide within the perfume category in the 60s and 70s. And we were debating this actually yesterday, weren't we, Chris, of there's a lot of other categories that you could apply this to. I think you mentioned razors, being Gillette as one of those key references.
Razors for women, twice the price, same product.
Different colour.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely something that is worth kind of exploring and just understanding. Do you think, is there anything in your experience or what you've kind of done over the years where you can see this kind of clear disconnect? I mean, you mentioned it earlier around a lot of double standards between men and women and commentary anyway.
No, not really. You mean the disconnect between the way that male attitudes towards
Beauty, in particular.
It's not really it's not a category I haven't had the good fortune to work in. I just think that marketers marketers aren't that dim. They know that there's a much richer vein to mine in the female side. Capitalism works that way, that it constantly needs to find new markets or new aspects to an existing market. And what it's doing now is doing a brilliant job of both capitalizing upon women's I'm doing it for myself and well-being aspects, and also I'm trying to look to the as you said before, the vanity aspect of it. So it's having it both ways at the moment. It's talking about well-being and your mental well-being, but it's also talking about your physical attributes. So so it's mining two seams in the female market at the moment, and probably find it's a lot easier to do that than create a new market on the male side, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely, actually. I think when we're talking about that in the marketplace, one of the other things that we have noticed is there seems to be a massive irritation with advertising these days. We saw from the recent BBH study that the number of people who find TV ads annoying has doubled over the last 20 years, and our research showed that 50% of people think ads aren't as funny as they used to be. 55% actually find them annoying. This was also clear, I think, from a lot of the comments that we saw off the back of the research. What do you think's behind that?
Orlando Wood has written a wonderful book called Lemon, How the Advertising Brain Turns Sour, and he attributes this to the dominance of the left hemisphere of the brain over the right hemisphere of the brain. And he says that periodically cultures shift between one and the other. And he says during periods when the former dominate, when the right hand of the brain dominates, creativity flourishes. The right brain tells stories with an engaging mix of nuance and metaphor, wordplay and humour, and it leavens it with an all-important handful of empathy. When the left brain, however, when that dominates, it is more literal, didactic and self-conscious, with a penchant for voiceovers telling the audience what to think. Now, if you look at even if you turn on telly now, you will find supers are used and voiceovers are used. Now, in the 1970s and 80s, the use of a super or a voiceover was the admission that there was no idea in this commercial. Okay. It was, but we are dominated by left-hand thinking, which is telling people what to think, which you can see manifesting itself in the social purpose movement. I will tell you what to think. I will tell you I will set your moral compass for you. Okay.
And funny enough, people prefer being entertained than being told what to think.
Strange, that, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that, and if I think
especially by an uninvited guest in
your own living room.
Yeah,
well, if you think back to kind of, we've referenced this a lot. There's some ridiculous adverts that I remember when I was younger that just stick in my. I can't necessarily always tell you what product they were for, but I can remember the catchphrase, describe it very vividly.
I remember, on the way to school, we would talk about what was on telly last night, the Monty Python something, and also about which ads we found funny.
Well, like
Can you imagine children doing that today?
No.
One of the classicals, and I don't want to sound like but do you remember this? Do you remember that? But the Smash Martians is regarded as...
That was the one that was in my mind, yeah.
Yes.
Number 2 of all time, according to one.
Well, it wasn't up until 2016.
And then it changed.
The latest research ranks that as number 100 now. But this is amongst marketers.
Exactly.
It's not amongst the public. This is amongst marketers. And they asked various leading people from the industry, the people who are shaping the advertising, what they think of the Martians.
They couldn't find the purpose.
And this came from Nicole Yershon. That's Nicole Yershon, ladies and gentlemen, Yershon.
Who came to one of our events not so very long ago. Yeah.
Right. Director Innovative Solutions, Ogilvy Group Advertising. And this was her view. So rather than reimagine the Martians, if she was doing this now, I'd focus on creating a program where a portion of Smash Mash sales is earmarked for hunger relief programs in areas of the world that are struggling with malnourishment and hunger. We could create a multi-platform Smash Mash feed. We could create a multi-platform Smash Mash feed the world presence in social media where volunteers can share their experiences and encourage others. You know, I go back to Andrew Tenzer and Ian Murray, that you would need a powerful fucking telescope to see the ad world bubble circling the real world, wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
It's a really difficult one, isn't it? I think it depends on what lens you look at this through, isn't it?
Well, what about looking at the lens that the consumer does? And I mean, this is the extraordinary thing to me, that how many marketers and advertisers are talking about what we're talking about today. And I don't just mean, okay, we have our opinions, which we've shared, but information like that about how consumers are actually reacting. I mean, the great thing about the BBH study is that it's called Charts That Don't Change. And I think there are 20 or something. And the thing is that the key thing about the advertising, it is the one that's changed the most. So really, if you look at it in the whole, in the context of the other charts, they are about things that matter to people, like their finances, their relationships within their families, and their attitudes to money and saving, and those things haven't really changed. Okay, so somebody is pushing a dial here. It's somebody outside of the consumer arena, somebody who's. And they're pushing it the wrong way, and the consumer's saying so. So I don't know that it's really that nuanced. I mean, marketers should be, the voice of the consumer inside the businesses that they operate in. And here we've got a scenario where they are shouting at the consumer, and the consumer is putting their finger in the ears. And that's evidenced by things like the BBH study. So surely there's something seriously wrong here.
I definitely think there's a lack of listening at times, isn't there? I mean, one of the things that we always strive of, and we talk about the basics and the foundations here, is, who are you trying to talk to?
Well, a lack of listening. We were told not to do consumer research, right?
Yeah, it's definitely...
by marketers. There's something, surely some mistake.
I think a lot of it maybe also comes from a place of fear of...
Sure.
Because it is such a volatile landscape in one way or another, is being afraid to say the wrong thing. It is the politics police, so to speak, and the kind of the finger waggers and everything else.
We're not asking them to actually make political statements. Actually don't make political statements. Make commercials which actually engage, entertain, and inform people about the products or services that you're selling. We have no right to introduce politics.
Exactly.
Into it. We have no authority to do it. We have no mandate to do it.
If you look at the list of the causes that a brand like Ben & Jerry openly support, what are they notable for? They're notable for their divisiveness. That is, they divide opinions very strongly. I mean, there are 2 points of view about them. And they're highly political. So you have to ask yourself the question, why are marketers picking highly divisive and highly political subjects and then saying that's what their brand is all about?
Because everyone else is doing it.
Well, that's certainly part of it, like Steve says, as groupthink. But like he also says, where's the mandate to do that? Where does it fit in with making ice cream?
But not so much that, is that what right have you got? If you have Howard Gossage said advertising is a privilege, not a right. And if you enter somebody's living room, or you're an uninvited guest, they haven't paid for you to come in, and so you have no right to then try and tell them how they think, to try and tell them your views upon issues that they cannot, neither of you can control. And we have no right, no mandate, and certainly no moral authority to be doing that.
Amazing. This has been incredible. I could literally talk to you guys for a long time. But the one final question I think I have for you today, Steve, is we've spoke about a lot today. Based on what we've spoke about, a lot of the research that we've touched on, we're really passionate about, while sharing all these different opinions, also giving some support and advice on how to move forward. Based on everything we've spoke about today, what one piece of advice would you give to the people listening to this?
On the client side and the marketing side?
I'd probably say the marketing and brand side.
I would say as the advice I would give anybody who gets involved in this racket, and that is, before you do anything, you ask yourself two problems. What is the problem faced by the person I am trying to talk to? And what is the solution provided by the product or service that I'm selling? And that is the solution provided by the product or service to that problem. And if you can't answer that problem, save your money, don't advertise.
Wow.
And I would also say that self-interest trumps altruism pretty much every time. And so the problem that you're trying to solve is a problem the person has. Not a problem they perceive that society has. It is a problem that that person has, and the thing that is keeping them awake at night, or niggling them, or aggravating them, or making them wish didn't happen, or making them wish they got, that is the problem you're trying to solve. And if you can't solve that, if you can't answer those two questions, don't bother advertising.
Amazing. Thank you so much for giving us your time today.
My pleasure.
It has been an absolute pleasure. And thank
Thank
you
you very much.